Yo, what is going on, mi gente? Today we are breaking down our latest release on Protocol Recordings, Think of You, with the homies MARE and Dallerium. This track has gotten some really dope support from David Guetta and a lot of other DJs, so let's go. Alright, so the first thing we're going to be diving into is going to be the drums. And most important element, of course, in the song is going to be the kick. So we chose a kick. It's going to be quite punchy. It's got shortness to it, of course, because we have a rolling bass, and we don't want the kick to be taking over too much of the low end. So of course, the relationship with the kick and the bass, we'll get that a little bit later. But first, more than anything, choosing the right kick is super important, so you don't have to do a whole bunch of work later. So we chose something again punchy. Went into the mid-side mode here, and for the mono signal, just chose to bump up here in E, and then duck down a little bit here in the 250 range, because it's always kind of a little muddy in the kick, and that clears up a whole lot already. We'll just A and B this so you can hear the difference. And it just tightens it up. Just with that quick trick there. And so that's all we got going on for the kick. So we'll start off with the drums. Next, we're going to go into the tops here. We'll keep the kick going, and we'll have the tops flowing. First, we're going to go with this open hi-hat. Of course, open hi-hat, guys, is a really important element, just as important, as I would say, as the kick. Of course, it's going to be a driving force in your track. For this track, we chose something a little bit more bright on this end. So, of course, we cleaned up a lot of the low end with this. Shorten it up a bit, but not too much, as you'll be hearing some of the minimal tech house that's out right now. That's got a little bit more like a James Hype feel with the energy, and then we'll have some tops added onto that. Nothing much to it other than just adding, of course, some energy. We'll jump into these claps as well, and these claps, we grouped them just so we have the basic root foundation clap right here. And then we'll add sort of like a humanized clap stereo on the back. And then we clean them both up, low end, and just kind of bump it up just a little bit in the 1K range here. And I approached this the same way as you would approach like a snare. You can have a little bit of air in this area, just not too much, so it doesn't take over much in the brightness area. And that's really all we got going on, other than the fills. We're going to be punching in here some of these reverse claps again. Think of more like James Hype 909 samples. With this sample selection is huge when it comes to these drums. And we got another fill that's quite very similar to that one. And as you hear here, right into the drop shaker, which is going to be in the breakdown here. So that's just got something. Let's get a little bit of another clap. Probably could have thrown this one in the group, but it's quite all right. Just again, 909 clap, just to give a little bit of energy and driving force into the breakdown, so we're not too stagnant on that. And we'll get into the build up here. So we didn't put the build snares with the drums, and for couple of different reasons. I'm finding myself lately not, taking out the build snares in the drums, and there's not really no right or wrong. It's all subjective, because if you start filtering like your drums and depending certain sections of the song, and then you want your build snare to have a little bit of like an impact on top of that, where the build is a little more impactful. It's hard to do that when everything's filtered in the drum. So I just, in this case, we just put the build snare outside of it. And just left that in the effects, which we'll get to later. And then for processing, guys, we're really not doing a whole lot of crazy processing when it comes into these mix downs, and it's even when it comes to like the masters and whatnot, it's all really based on sound selection, which is another thing that has gone back to some of the releases that we've had in the past, where we use some kicks, where we use some tops and hi-hats and things that have worked for us, that we know, that we trust. And that's something that you have to go, not with your gut instinct, but things that you can just, that you released in the past that you've trusted with a remix or something you got supported by a big DJ. Go with that. Clearly something worked, right? So as far as for the processing here, we'll take off the saturation and the glue compressor here, so you can hear the difference in A and B. I'm gonna start with the saturation here to go to glue everything here. Take it off. And we got about 40%, nothing that's killing it, and more than anything, gluing all these elements together. So you get these transients, especially like in the tops, to kind of come out a little bit more. No more than just 5. Try not to push it too much more than that. You can even go quicker release if you'd like to, but I try not to go quicker than 1. With this, got the soft clipper on. And that's really all we got to it, guys. A and B that. Kick. And that's all we got for the drums. So as we'll get into the kick drums here, we'll start putting this bass in so you can start getting familiar with this relationship that we have. Take off the drums. And so let's dive into this bass. And not punch my microphone as I do that. So first, more than anything, guys, not overthinking a lot of things here. Keep it simple with a lot of these elements. And so with the rolling bass, we chose to go 1 patch, but let's look underneath the hood here a little bit and see what is actually happening. 2 oscillators. We got a saw, an oscillator B, oscillator A, 2 octaves down, more than that oscillator B here, so it's got a little bit more of a deeper tone. This is going to have a little bit more higher octave. And that gives it more of that body. And if you guys are getting more into sound design or creating your own basses, getting into the basic shapes is going to be the best thing for you. As you'll see, saws are probably your number 1 option to go with basses. Squares are a great option too if you're looking for like more of like a digital sound to it. And then you can kind of triangles. There's a lot of hybrid waves out there too. But try not to get too crazy with it. It's all of the basic shapes. You can't go wrong with that. And so as with this one, we even chose like a square. So for this. And most importantly, more than anything, these I think the envelope too is going to be routed to this cutoff, which is huge. That's where the maker really the impact is with this bass. If you do that solely, bear with me here. Let me get this. Boy, I'm having technical difficulties. Huh? If I turn this off, even with the 16th note rhythms that I have. Major difference. So of course keeping that cutoff is huge, and gauge it. And so that's really all we got going on. Oops, let me not all we got going on. Take that back. Let me go under the effects here, which is going to be very, very important. Of course, compression, OTT multiband that we have got going on here. Without it, it's not going to be maybe as bright. The delay, little bit here. Actually, looks like we even got none going on. It looks like we turned it down all the way here. The reverb, same here. EQ. A little bit hyperdimension. And so that brings us into our next OTT, just at 20% here. If you guys want to get crazy too, a little hack, I think it was Virtual Ride that I learned from years ago, to get a little bit more transient action. If you turn this time knob all the way up, cool little way to get more transient in your bass or whatever instrument that you decide to put that OTT on. Then we got old throw it back to Sausage Fattener. If you guys are still even using this, and for those who are not familiar, I might have aged myself with this one, but Sausage Fattener, still got it. Got a little bit of fatness at 10%, color 22. All this really is, guys, is just a nice way of using like saturation and compression all into one. Decapitator, if you want to use a Saturn II with that, can't go, you are not going wrong with that whatsoever. Rolling off these lows to about 29, so I'm not going to too much rumble with this. Kickstart, side chain this. This one I went a little higher with the side chain. Typically, you go with the clean or the free punch, which I'm big fans of. But check out the difference that you have, especially with like a rolling bass. Gotta be careful with that. Feel a little bit more of the pump that I'm looking for. In this case, it's all subjective what you're looking for. I see a lot of guys now, West End, some of these other guys that are throwing out really dope tips, to kind of keep your band. They're using multi-band sidechain, which is dope. keeping it 150 to 200 range so that you're sidechaining certain frequencies only. But in this case, I just kind of want to have to get a little bit more of that oomph and that pumping effect. So just ran through it with that. And that's all we got going for the rolling bass and the drop. And then the other thing that we have for the second bass in this second bass in the bass group is just a respace for breakdowns. Good little hack. If you want to think about respace, it's like the cello of the EDM world or the dance world, or even just really of electronic music as we are in today's world. It's kind of what it is. It lays a good bed for breakdowns, and you hear a lot in drops. You hear a lot for the low end and the high end. So for this case, for breakdowns, so this respace just super simple. Gonna probably be some saw waves, as you see. It's a patch here, but of course, guys, with patches, you can always, if you know it a little bit, just a sound design goes a tremendously long way. Respaces are probably the first thing you'll learn learning sound design. It's just the easiest thing to make. It's just two saw waves. You throw one in a higher octave, the other one a lower octave, or whatever range you're looking for, and play with a little of the detunements if you want. Get a little stereo. But in this case, we got sort of like a bandpass filter that's going through that's automating. So it's kind of a little bit of storytelling with this. So jump into the effects. We're not going to get too much into this one because, again, this is just a patch. And I didn't really like build this guy up or anything of that sorts. Distortion, tube distortions, great choice to go with if that's going to be your distortion of choice. Soft clip is a good one that I like to go with as well too. So sometimes I'll flip between the two. But again, not to get too carried. EQ, rolling off. Highs, chorus, give a little bit of the stereo width, compression, multi-band compression at about 100. Makes a difference, definitely for sure. Filter, and then a hyperdimension. So that's quite a lot for a Reese, if I may, say. But it really depends. That's why there's not a whole lot of processing post with that, and so that's something that you got to be aware of in your mixes. Is that it's just because you see a fat chain used by your favorite producer does not mean you have to do the same exact thing to get that same result. You can do a lot of this stuff, especially we're not even using Serum 2. This is still Serum 1, and you can still get some incredible sounds out of that, post processing in the box, all that, etc., without really just overdriving and killing your source signal. And so with this, took off a lot of the high end here, rolled off about 696. Kind of give it a little bit of a pocket or choked it a bit. And then we just filter it right at the end here for these transitions. So what's that doing? Really is just taking off the lows. It's, as you guys know, it's taking off the lows, and as much as the frequencies in that spectrum is key for your build-up so that when your impact comes in, it's in your motherfucking face. So that's all we got going on for the basses. Let's jump into the instruments. We'll separate these here a little bit. We're jumping to the chords. We're going to stay in the breakdown before we get into the drop. Once again, guys, not a whole lot going on for the breakdown. Break pads we have for this. It's got like an 80s synthwave vibe for this. Dimension, chorus, delay, reverb, good stuff as you see, and rolling off a lot of this low in here because that's already that real estate is owned by that respace, and you don't have any phasing issues with that. Pads are the one of the number one things that you can get really into trouble with phase issues because it's a lot going on with the pads. Typically these have so many voices, 7. You'll have pads sometimes with like 16 voices with automations happening inside with the cutoff, and it's just a lot CPU that's happening, and it's a lot of signal that's going in. So if you got a lot of chords or a big chord happening, think about all that data that's got to come through. So it's pushing a lot, and then put that into your spectrum. Well, you got to be careful. You got to know where you're at with your sounds, so you're not cramming too much, stuff in your room, right? So that's all we got for that. And then we'll come in here at the top with another sort of more like an impact stab, or it's like a stab more than anything, but not like something brash or something too harsh. It's good following the sounds that you were choosing. It's kind of in that 80s realm. So this one, of course, is more unlike a pad where you have like a long sustain and it keeps it up there. This one's very quick. And it's not, as you notice in the beginning of when this breakdown happens, and I see that a lot with producers. I tease a lot, but you just don't blow your load. When it comes to first thing, when you're getting into sections of your song, build up to it a little bit. I know our attention spans are getting shorter and shorter, but use that to your advantage too. So maybe every 8 bars, you're introducing something new, a new element, a new direction, a new thing. And so even just in this case, it's just a stab, same chords. And so we'll get into that's all we got going. Let me see here. And so this ties into the pads before we get into the drop, into the atmospheres that are in this breakdown as well too. Atmospheres are huge, guys. When you take a look at breakdowns, take a look at really what's happening, other project files, or when you're looking down at other breakdowns, the obviously the sounds that they're choosing, if you see like 80 pads, or 10 pads there, and it's got like just a big emotional breakdown, they probably don't have a lot of atmospheres, a lot of like Foley stuff kind of going in the back. And if they do, it's got to be complementary to what's happening with the instruments. But sometimes you'll see in this case, like for this, you'll have like a pad, just like one pad, but then that's tag teaming, collaborating with something as busy as like this atmosphere. There's a lot going on with that atmosphere. You got pads, you got some ARP action in there. And it's atmospheric. So tie that in. That's everything. That's essentially everything you're looking for. So bring that in to the breakdown here. And then we got a complete sounding body. And then we'll get into the drop pads. Very similar as to what you're hearing with the synthwave one. They're not quite busy. It's not too airy. It's just very, very synthwavy. It's pushed back a little bit more. We'll take a look underneath here. What's happening? I think this is the same exact one. Yeah, Sunshine. Yeah. Oh, look at that. 2 sunshines happening here, little buddy. All right. So yeah, it's the same exact one that we have going on for this, but this one, it's processed a little bit differently. OTT with this, more lows that we've cut off. And so this one's just ever so slightly higher too in the spectrum. Very important, as you can see, because it's not all just. Sometimes you'll see that in like a part B section if that comes in. In this case, we drop this in right as it goes, and the impact of the drop. You'll see that a lot, like melodic techno or melodic house, and so. So let's get into the old sexy lead that carries on this just emotional theme of this song. And so this Think of You lead that we have here. Back to the old, man, we're getting real. I should be a meteorologist after this. It's getting real sunny. Just a sunny lead. Very something, 2 oscillators. But as you see, the oscillator B is a saw wave. That's super important. Oscillator A is very saw-ish, as you see too. So again, this falls into that category. If you're creating your own sounds, know what you're choosing. This one's really impactful. It's only got 1, so it's mono. This one's we got 5, so it's got a little bit of stereo with it too. So as you can hear the difference, A and B it. That sounds like a rave lead, like an old school rave lead just by itself, but this mono lead is the punch of it. I wouldn't say the body of it, but definitely the heartbeat and the pulse. Isn't that crazy? It's just one wave has such an impact on the whole song. And so going to the effects, EQ, bumping a little bit of the body here in the 1500 range here, hyperdimension, compression, multi-band as you see here, distortion with a down sample. You can hear ever so slightly. I would say maybe not, right? Like 1%. This one's actually not even doing too much. And then the reverb, 0% or 5%, and then the delay, we're going to be at 0%. So with this, post effects, they keep them on, but with the dry effects, we'll turn them off in some cases, and sometimes we'll keep them off and then automate them. But in this case, we didn't do that. We just kept it on the post, and we put the delay here, and that's all she wrote with that one. Saturation, of course, to glue your elements. OTT, 10%, delay, and then the kickstart is going to be automating. Of course, when the drop comes, and that's something that you guys constantly be aware of. Respaces, vocals, instruments, plucks. Automate the side chain. Don't always just keeping it pumping club effect, as some of you will know it to be. Be aware of the sounds that you're pushing away. If the kick ain't there, maybe you don't need the side chain, or maybe you don't need it as aggressively. But of course, it is a feel, it's a pulse. It depends really the dynamics of the song that are going on to fit that. And then we're rolling off some lows all the way up to 79, increasing my body. We had 1500, but now we're going in more of the 3K range. Automating the volume with this. This is something I don't see a lot of people do. It's storytelling a little bit. Too much, right? There's a lot of areas where you'll see it more drastically, or even other projects where you see it more drastically in transitions or things like that, rather than automating your channel, which is, it's okay, but it's a little messy. But in this case, we use this more like for the second utility. For the gain, this is more for the drop. You'll see that a lot of like the master chain, where you increase the volume just like 1 to 2 decibels when that drop hits. And then the old filter and the breakdowns. Of course, we don't want to increase all the highs and all that good stuff in the break. We want to have that all something to lead to. We don't want to blow the load until we get to the drop. What a great lead. What a sexy lead that is. So that's all we have going on for the instruments. We're going to get into the effects next, and then we're going to touch very lightly on the vocals here, just because YouTube is just so nice when it comes to putting on your own music and trying to break it down and whatnot. For some reason, it just copyrights, and you will get striked for it. So we'll touch ever so slightly on the processing and the vocals that we have for that. So let's dive into these effects that we have here. A lot that is going on. Typically, you'll hear, especially like a minimal tech house and all these genres in house right now that are happening, not a whole lot of effects. However, you dive into a genre of like melodic house, trance, melodic techno, there still is some effects, artificial stuff kind of happening with this. Bigger downlifters, bigger uplifters, sweeps and things like that. You're not really hearing that in minimal tech. The tech house, you're hearing more like reverse crashes, and the instruments that you use, sometimes you're just reversing and using those, to get to what you're trying to achieve. In this case, as we talked about the build snare, the second thing we have under this is a riser for the build up. Big riser. Without it, it'd be just absolutely. And then we got the downlifter here. Big downlifter. It's a nice little sweep that we have here. And these are all cashmere sweeps. These are such. Cashmere is just always coming to the rescue when it comes to these effects. So when it comes to effects, the way that I've learned in the past, when we used to use a lot of uplifters and downlifters and all those risers in the world, to really have like a limit with that, try to keep it with 2. You don't want to have a lot of different uplifters and different risers, because then it just sounds it's not in unison with the sounds that you're using. And so I try to probably cap it out at 2 when it comes to using a lot of effects. But again, try not to use a lot of those effects. If you're using for like instruments, like a synth, try to flatten that, reverse it, using like a nice reverse synth. That has such an impact, rather than using just like a reverse sweep. It's just a little bit of work goes a long way when it comes to that. So that's all we got going on for the effects, folks. All right, so for the last thing we're going to go over is going to be the vocals. And so for the vocals, we're going to have a whole lot going on. We'll play just a little bit so I don't get taken down by YouTube. But saturation, OTT, ever so slightly, 16%, and some reverb, EQ, and then for the side chain, the side chaining, it's going to be in the drop that we have here. Of course, anywhere where the kick is punching in And that's all we got going on for the vocals, guys. Really not a whole lot happening for that.
Something about you feels.
And play chords building into the drop.
My situation's critical. My situation's critical. I only think of.
So that's going to be the breakdown of the song. One thing I really want you guys to take from this is that it doesn't take 40, 30 channels to make a good song, to make a hit. Sound selection is the most important thing when it comes to production and knowing how to get your idea to canvas. I feel like Ableton's one of the easiest things to do that to. Is important, having a good reference, and more than anything, guys, just finishing your idea. And so I hope you guys learned something in this video. Make sure you guys like, subscribe, do all the things. It really means a whole lot to us. And see you on the next one.